Well, welcome back, everyone. This is Two Beards and a Bible. I'm John Swaino.
I'm Dave Ten.
And I just told Dave I was ready. Where are we?
We're in the back room of my house. Now what do we do?
I'm not that far gone yet.
Oh.
Chapter 5, verse 1?
Chapter 5, verse 1. Is it my turn?
I think so.
I'm going to read down to verse 6. Stand fast, therefore, in the liberty by which Christ has made us free, and do not be entangled again with a yoke of bondage. If indeed I, Paul, say that to you, that if you become circumcised, Christ will profit you nothing. And I testify again to every man who becomes circumcised that he is a debtor to keep the whole law. You have become estranged from Christ, you who attempt to be justified by the law. You have fallen from grace. For we, through the Spirit, eagerly wait for the hope of righteousness by faith. For in Christ Jesus, neither circumcision nor uncircumcision avails anything, but faith working through love. So now he kind of gets into some of the details of the things that the Galatian brethren were trying to do. Mm-hmm. So obviously we've been talking about how the Galatians have been trying to go back and keep the law because these Judaizing, how do you say that? Judaizing, thank you, John. Judaizing teachers had come there and they were trying to teach that they needed to keep parts of the law. So now he's going to actually pinpoint some things that they're doing.
And this whole idea of circumcision, there in verse 2, if you become circumcised, Christ will profit you nothing. What is who are the circumcised?
I mean, the Jews, it was a command of Jews that they were to be circumcised. It was a sign, a physical sign that they belonged to God.
Right. It's not speaking of the physical act of being circumcised. It's the idea of being, again, enslaved to the old law.
Yeah, I didn't think about that way.
In verse 6, it kind of nails it all together, I think. For in Christ Jesus, neither circumcision nor uncircumcision avails anything, but faith working through love. So,
well, I guess I read that as like, okay, so these Jews were now, these Gentile Jews, or these Gentile Christians were now becoming circumcised in the flesh to keep part of the old law.
Right. There's no doubt that those were trying to uphold that part of the old law were probably encouraging people to be circumcised,
or teaching that they had to be circumcised.
To be like them.
And I think Peter got caught up in this exact same thing, right? Mm-hmm. So, I mean, it was... So Paul says that if you become circumcised, Christ will profit you nothing. But I think, as you were just saying, I don't know if that's necessarily implying the physical act, but the idea of following after the old law.
Yeah, that's what I would. That's what, in the context of everything, that seems to be the necessary.
Yeah, I totally.
The necessary conclusion.
Yes. He says, I testify again to every man who becomes circumcised that he's a debtor to keep the whole law. So if you're going to keep that part of the law by becoming circumcised,
then you got to do it all.
You got to do it all.
And that's one of the things I guess we can make a point that there are so many, throughout history and even yet today, who will take the Bible, they'll open it up and they'll cherry pick a verse, and what kind of havoc can you wreak in modern society if you say, and I testify again to every man who becomes circumcised that he is a debtor to keep the whole law, or that if you become circumcised in verse 2, Christ will profit you nothing.
Right.
So you could build a whole false doctrine on just that.
Oh, you could.
And so that, I guess my as we're chasing squirrels here, or I'm trying to anyway. The whole point is you have to take things into context and understand what is being said.
Yeah.
It's not you can't just pick and choose and pick verses. That's what so many groups do.
Yeah, he was using circumcision as one of the things that they were doing of trying to go back and hold on to things of the old law. No doubt there were other things too, I'm sure.
Right.
I mean, that's why in previous chapters he mentioned, days and months. That they were keeping special days. So there was more than just this.
And that whole idea of having to keep the whole law, becoming a debtor to the whole law, thinking of those groups that we talked about, I believe, in the last episode that, do try to keep those feasts and so on.
Yeah.
Yet, how many of them actually keep the rest of the law?
None.
And that's, it's even those today that claim, the modern Jews, very few do much of the, keeping the entirety of the whole law.
Yeah.
I don't even know to the Hasidic Jews. I mean, they might be the closest.
Probably.
But I don't know that.
But they don't keep the law.
Keep the whole law.
No. He says, you have become estranged from Christ, you who attempt to be justified by the law, you have fallen from grace. So, when we go back and try to hold on to the old law, we're basically, we're separating ourselves from Christ when we do that. Mm-hmm. And that could be as, I'd say, like teaching that we're supposed to tithe.
Right.
That would be one of those things. Probably a thing you see more often than probably a lot of these other things.
Oh, yeah. And when you boil that down, it becomes, why would somebody try to bind tithing today?
Because they need money.
Yeah, it's a control thing.
Oh, yeah, it is.
I've been a part of religious groups in the past that would even, you would order and buy your own offering envelopes, and each week, they had each week printed, the date on each envelope, and you were supposed to make sure to keep up with those. I'd been in other places where they would give out a pledge card, and you were going to tell them, I'm going to give this much, this is my income, and I'm going to give this percentage of my income throughout the year. And they counted on that, they kept track. And they actually had a tally of this person gave this much, and
I've read about groups that have financial planners.
Yeah.
That will sit down and figure out how much money you can give. Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
All of those things are completely foreign to the Bible.
Right. And that sadly is what causes so many people to just shy away from religion whatsoever.
Oh, no doubt.
They just don't even want to talk about the Bible because they think that everybody is a charlatan that is going to speak.
And if that's the way it was, I would shy away from it myself.
Yeah.
Right?
Well, and how easy is it to find those charlatans? They're everywhere.
No, they are.
And so,
every town has them.
Yeah. And so, can you find a faithful Church of Christ in every town?
No.
I was trying to help the fellow elder and we were looking yesterday to try to find a church out in the far reaches of Western Ohio for somebody who desired to be baptized. And I'm telling you, it's difficult. I found a lot of buildings with Church of Christ on the sign.
Yeah.
But again, once you got into starting to try to figure out, the things that they do, you find a lot of additions to the doctrine of Christ being adhered to. and it was very difficult. I think we might have found one.
Yeah.
Which is enough. But it is so easy to fall victim to the false teachings.
Yes. Verse 5, for we, through the Spirit, eagerly wait for the hope of righteousness by faith. For in Christ Jesus neither circumcision nor uncircumcision avails anything, but faith working through love. And I think that points out that, that our faith is a working faith. Mm-hmm. James 2:24, what's that say?
I got to go over there. Hebrews, James 2:24. You see then that a man is justified by works and not by faith only.
Right. That's what Paul's saying here too.
Yeah.
Faith, when he says that our faith is working through love, and we're justified by that.
Yeah. And, you really get down to there's a whole nother lesson in the idea of what love is.
Yeah.
Faith working through love. If you love the Lord, you keep his commandments just as Christ loved us. He did what was unthinkable.
Yep.
In our minds, anyway.
Yep. John, you want to read verse 7 through 15?
Sure. So, chapter 5, verse 7. You ran well. Who hindered you from obeying the truth? This persuasion does not come from him who calls you. A little leaven leavens the whole lump. I have confidence in you, in the Lord, that you will have no other mind, but he who troubles you shall bear his judgment, whoever he is. And I, brethren, if I still preach circumcision, why do I still suffer persecution? Then the offense of the cross has ceased. I could wish that those who trouble you would even cut themselves off. For you, brethren, have been called to liberty, only do not use liberty as an opportunity for the flesh, but through love serve one another. For all the law is fulfilled in one word, even in this, you shall love your neighbor as yourself. But if you bite and devour one another, beware lest you be consumed by one another.
Okay. I like in verse 7, he says, you ran well. Mm-hmm. What I underlined that, and I did a little research. Paul uses this idea of running.
Yeah.
And this is there's 4 times that it's used. Well, one of them is in Hebrews, and we're not sure if Paul wrote that. But, Galatians 2:2, James 2:20, Galatians 2:2, 1 Corinthians 9:24, Hebrews 12:1, and Galatians 5:7 all use this example of running. Mm-hmm. And it must have, I know for a fact, I mean, you think about the, what are those, a marathon. Mm-hmm. That was a thing that people ran back then.
Yeah, right.
There were the Olympic Games and all these different things that were going on in this area of the world.
Right.
So, anyways, Paul uses that.
And it makes sense. I mean, if we've all run, it might have been a long time ago.
Yeah.
But
yes.
We can all kind of identify with that.
I always tell them guys at work, I said, if you see me running, you better run too.
Right.
Something bad's going on. He says you ran well. So the idea is you were doing a good job before. He says, who hindered you from obeying the truth? So he's basically putting the blame on them. Mm-hmm. Who hindered them? They hindered themselves, right?
Yeah. I mean, that's a lesson that most of the time you learn that one, like in preschool, kindergarten, that you're in control of your actions.
Yes. Yep. He says this persuasion does not come from him who calls you. It didn't come from God. He says a little leaven leavens the whole lump. If you've ever made bread, mm-hmm. It doesn't take up much yeast to make a lot of bread rise.
Right. So that's what I preached on Sunday is, letting a little bit of the world in.
Yep. He says, I have confidence in you in the Lord that you will have no other mind, but he who troubles you shall bear his judgment, whoever he is. So, mm-hmm. Whoever this false teacher is going to be judged for that. Mm-hmm. Verse 11.
And I, brethren, if I still preach circumcision, why do I still suffer persecution? Then the offense of the cross has ceased.
What do you think about that?
I don't know. I was hoping you had something.
I mean, it says if I still preach circumcision, why do I still suffer persecution? I mean, if Paul was teaching that you had to be circumcised, why would people still be if he was going along with all these Jewish things, which maybe they were claiming that he was, mm-hmm. But if he's saying if I was doing that, I wouldn't be persecuted.
Right? Why are you after me?
He says, then the offense of the cross has ceased. He says, I would wish that those who trouble you would even cut themselves off.
And
I'd hope that's not a circumcision joke.
Right. The offense of the cross. When you think of That's kind of a strong statement, but
Yeah.
that's what it is for people, that are refusing Christ. It becomes an offense to them.
Yes.
Yeah.
He says, "For you, brethren, have been called to liberty, only do not use your liberty as an opportunity for the flesh, but through love one serve one another." Mm-hmm. So, so the liberty is that we're free from sin. I guess it isn't that we're free to do anything we want, right?
Yeah. And that liberty is a huge subject.
Yeah.
I think about it a lot. And when you think of, what liberty sort of means freedom, but again, we have that ability to do many more things than were possible under the old law. We have such an easier time of things. And you kind of think of here in the United States, we have great liberty to do as we wish, but as we learn when we're kids, or hopefully we learn it when we're kids, that our actions have consequences. And so, yeah, you can do that, but what's going to come of that? So you can't use your liberty, your freedom, your ability to do what you want. God gave us free will, and so we have that ability to make our own choices, but we can't take that and run with it so far that we forget what it is the Lord wants us to do.
True freedom is not something that's desirable. Really, you have to have, in order to have some freedom, you have to have law, which restricts freedom, right? If you just philosophically think about that. So, you have to, in order to have freedom, you have to have law. Because if there is no law, when I exercise my freedom, I may, squelch your freedom.
Right.
And that's
the way we have to think as Christians. There are many among us in the church that they may have a scruple one way or another.
Yeah.
They might feel that it is wrong to do a certain thing, and we might disagree with them, and we might be right.
Yeah.
It might not really be a big deal, but we wouldn't want to use our liberty and our understanding of the truth to do something that would cause a brother to stumble.
Right. Exactly.
And that carries with it a huge weight. And you're right. That true freedom really is requires some order, and it does boil down to requiring some sort of governing law, which we have in the scriptures. Even thinking back to, again, Israel wanting a king because they just couldn't handle the freedom of just being with
God,
the Lord.
having God as their
Yeah.
king. Yeah. And I think when we talk about Christian liberty, it has to be understood that it doesn't mean you can do anything you want to do.
Right.
I think that's what Paul's kind of pointing out here.
Yeah, going back to what you mentioned, in a near episode in the past, talking about, God's end of things and our end of things. Our liberty can't usurp what God has
Absolutely
done on His end.
Yeah. Yeah, and he says, don't use your liberty as an opportunity for the flesh.
Yeah.
I'm not sure what that language means.
Well, all of our desires, if we use our liberty to do something, we have a desire towards that, and that would include, all of them are pretty much fleshly desires.
Yeah.
I desire to do this or that. When we think of the flesh, we often think of sensual or sexual kinds of connotations, and that would include that.
Yeah.
But just because we want to do it doesn't mean that it's a good idea.
Right. And maybe that's why he uses this example. He says, for all the laws are fulfilled in one word, even this, you shall love your neighbor as yourself.
Yeah.
Right. So we have this liberty, but we're supposed to put others in front of our liberty.
Yeah.
We're supposed to be servants.
Right.
We're supposed to be, we're supposed to love others in the same, we wouldn't do something evil to them because we wouldn't do something evil to ourselves.
Yeah. I mean, that in a nutshell would cure all of the ills of the world.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly.
You know, if the world leaders would think about what was best for their neighbor,
Yes.
and vice versa, wouldn't have a war.
But if you bite and devour one another, beware lest you be consumed by one another. And of course, that happens. Mm-hmm. I have seen that happen.
Yeah.
Yeah. People can get so worked up over things that they end up falling away. Both parties end up falling away.
Yeah.
Over something that was stupid.
Right.
Some of these concepts, it's interesting. Some of these basic concepts, I think it's like you could use Romans 14, which we've studied previously, where, it kind of talks about all of those ideas, about, don't do something that's going to offend your brother.
Right.
If you know something's going to offend them, then just stay away from that. And because, you wouldn't want them to do something to you that's offensive. Right. So that's not loving your neighbor if you do that. And that's Romans 14. That's basically what the whole chapter's about.
Verse 19 of Romans 14, therefore let us pursue the things which make for peace and the things by which one may edify another.
Yeah.
Building up.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
I was at a party. You were there too at this last singing. Mm-hmm. And walked in the kitchen, and there was a group of people in there having a political argument.
Yeah, this was at a brother's house.
Yes. Yeah. And I did say something. I said, guys, God's in control, but you know what? It's a fruitless argument, and it's not you got people arguing about political things. It does nothing. There's nothing good that comes out of that. Yeah. It's only negative.
Yeah.
So what I saw was a bunch of immature Christians.
Yeah.
That's what I saw.
Yeah.
Because a mature Christian wouldn't engage in that.
Right. I have some, as you well know, I have some very strong political beliefs, as I'm sure you do. And but yeah,
yours may be stronger than mine.
But the signs in my yard would probably say so.
Yeah.
but anyway, there are things. I'm very careful. I try to be very careful about not causing strife over. I have my wonderings of how a person claiming Christ can believe certain things. And that's one of the things that can really cause division if you start getting into those things. And when you're speaking of, especially in the work of the church, what is our purpose? It's to build each other up in Christ, not tear each other down in our beliefs outside of that.
I mean, if you're talking about political candidates, so what we're going to argue which one's the bigger sinner?
Right.
Well,
and that does. It's a pretty even race.
It's a pretty even race most of the time, right?
Right, and that would be true no matter who was there.
Yes,
because everybody has fallen short.
Yeah, so I mean, it's got to be careful. I harp on this a lot because I see it tearing people apart.
Yeah,
for no reason.
Yeah,
it's an opinion, right?
Right. So, and regardless, if you have that hope in Christ, it doesn't matter who is the king.
No, or the president or the governor. It doesn't matter.
Yeah.
It's
you might be able to make a case that you'd prefer it to be a little easier, maybe. Yeah. But ultimately, and this is really hard to wrap our heads around, and while we're living this physical life, that in eternity, none of that, it really just doesn't matter.
It doesn't matter. I mean, in this country, we all have the same power, right? We all have one vote that we can do. And really, I guess I don't understand why people even argue about this stuff.
Right.
But whatever. It's not like you're going to convince them of anything, but especially in Brethren, and Brethren, I've seen this multiple times. I've seen friendships that were 40 years old be destroyed.
Yeah.
Over arguments about who was going to be the president,
Right. Which is ridiculous.
which is ridiculous.
And it really shows forth a lack of unity in the same, what is our goal?
Right.
It's Christ.
All right. People have lost sight of the goal. So,
Yeah.
Do I want my person to win? Yes.
Right.
Right. But am I going to be real upset if they don't? Probably not.
No.
I don't really care that much.
Right. Right. Yeah. I mean, it's, again, you have to focus your mind, and that takes work. Like I've told you before, I've mentioned it to the brethren. Sometimes this subject will come up in a lesson, because I know it's something that can divide people. And I have to personally, I've got to shut the news off.
Oh, yeah. Same here.
I have to just put my nose back in the Bible, think on spiritual things, and just put those things away, and who cares?
Yeah.
And it'll be okay.
Yeah, absolutely.
So,
What is that, Philippians chapter 4? Think on these things?
yeah.
Yeah, so that's what we need to do. Where are we at time? John, we might as well just... we're not going to get through the next section. We're at 26 minutes. We'll just go ahead and stop here.
All right. Well, thanks for joining in. We hope you found it helpful. We'll see you next time.
Yep.